ever wanted to try smocking, but you don't have a pleater? Well, it's easy to give smocking a try with a pre-pleated insert. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use one and get you started smocking. I'm Lisa from Pink Holly Bush Designs. I love to sew, I love to smock, and I enjoy showing others how to do those things. So grab a cup of tea, slow down, come join me in my sewing studio, and let's make something lovely today. So this is a smocking insert. Doesn't look like much, does it? It's just a strip of plain white broadcloth fabric that has been run through the pleater. And I'm going to show you how to use it and why you'd want to. So first up, let's talk about why you would want to use it. So if you look at this little dress here, you might not initially even pay attention to it, but this is an insert. As you can see, the smocking is on the white fabric. And the advantage of this is that it really lets the smocking stand out. Now, rather than, like I did in this dress, where I smocked over the printed fabric. It's a different look. I love this one too, but if you really want that smocking to stand out, you need that white background fabric that you can get with an insert. So that's the first reason you might want to use it. Now the second reason you might want to use it is smocking is done on what we call a 3-to-1 ratio. So it takes 3 inches of fabric to produce 1 inch of pleated fabric. And that's a lot of fullness to the fabric. Now you might not want that amount of fullness in the dress or your design. In this particular little dress, the insert is at a 3-to-1 ratio, but the skirt is only gathered in here at a 2.5-to-1 ratio. The birdie fabric had enough body to it that to try to gather 3-to-1 across here was just way too much. And so I used less fullness. You also, especially in an adult garment, might not want that degree of fullness. The third reason that you might want to use an insert is the one I mentioned in the introduction. If you don't have a pleater, it's a great way to try smocking and see if you're interested in it without the investment of purchasing a pleater yourself. Pre-pleated inserts are available in my shop, and there'll be a link down below this video that you can check them out. But it gives you a chance to try smocking for a few dollars and see if you're interested in it or not. Alright, so now that I've convinced you to give an insert a try, how do you put one into a pattern, especially if your pattern doesn't call for that? And that is exactly what led me to make this video in the first place. Was I had a customer who emailed me. She had purchased a couple of the inserts and she wants to put them in a dress that she's making for herself. So I'm going to walk you through how you would do that. It's really very simple and it's not difficult. So don't get scared away, and let's go into the details of how you would put that into a dress. Now the first decision you're going to have to make is exactly what height do you want your insert. There's no right or wrong to this. It really is just a matter of what you think looks good. You're the designer, so you want to keep in mind the proportion of the outfit, but you can make that insert as high or as narrow as you would like. So in this little dress, let's see, I've got my ruler here, and the insert is about 2.5 inches. So I think 2.5 inches is a good height, and we'll go with that. So I have here a simple bodice pattern. This is from my July Flowers dress. And we've decided that we're going to have a height of 2.5 inches for our insert. And we So I'm going to figure out where I want that to fall on here. Now there's really no right or wrong reason. You're the designer and you need to decide what you think will look good. So I think putting it maybe right about there would be good. I want to make sure, you know, it doesn't interfere here with the neck. So I'm going to put it a little bit below that and have it come all the way over here to the edge. So I think that'll make for a good situation. So I'm just going to mark that on my pattern, and I have made a copy of the pattern, so don't do this on your original because we're going to cut it apart in a minute. So I've marked my 2.5 inches, and I'm going to draw that. Make sure we're getting our lines straight. Okay. And there's my 2.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and cut my pattern apart, which is why I made a copy of it. And I'm now going to trace each of these pieces on my paper here to create new pattern pieces. Okay, so I've traced each of the pattern pieces that I cut apart. Now eventually we're going to want to put these all back together again, and so to do that I need to add a seam allowance. Otherwise, when I sew them back together, I'd end up with a bodice that is much too short. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can add whatever amount the pattern calls for. As you can see. We'll continue actually with this curve. We're just going to continue that on down. So this one, I'm gonna, the middle piece, which is going to be my smocked piece, I need to add that 1/2 inch on both the top and the bottom. Slide that up so you can see that that's what I'm doing. And then on this very bottom piece, again, I just need the 1/2 inch on the top of it. So again, I'm now going to cut my pattern pieces out. So here's my 3 pieces with their seam allowances added and all cut out. Now the top piece and the bottom piece we're going to cut out of the fashion fabric. So they are all set to go, and we're just going to set them aside. We don't need them anymore. Well, you'll need them when you cut out your fabric, obviously, but we don't need to do anything else with them. They're all set to go. This is my piece to use for the smocked insert, and you can see it's got the 1/2 inch seam allowance at both the top and the bottom. So how are we going to use this with our smocking? So the first thing we want to do is cut the insert down to the correct height. Now, if you were doing this yourself with your own pleater, you would just make it the correct height in the first place. But assuming you've purchased one, they come, you know, in this they come bigger than you probably need. So we're going to put this on. I'm going to line that thread up. Now you can see I'm not putting it all the way up to the edge. And the reason for that is you really do want that top thread to be in the seam allowance. It helps you get those pleats to stand up nice and straight when you're constructing it. So I'm going to put this so that I have both a top thread and a bottom thread in the seam allowance. And so as far as height goes, I would then cut this, so I was just cutting this pink thread right off, and I'd trim up here at the top as well. I would mark that those 2 points. I could use the pink thread as my guide to cut it on the bottom, and then I would just trim this at this height up here. I'd use a fabric marker to mark that and trim it down to this height that I've decided that I want to use. Now the customer that emailed me and wants to use this insert in a garment for herself is making a dress that buttons down the front, and she wants to put the smocked insert on either side of that. So the insert comes with a width of 60 inches, and a 3-to-1, that would be 20 inches that it can go down to. She doesn't need that 20 inches for either side, so she could cut this insert in half and use just the one insert for the dress. So how would she do that? Well, she'd find the middle of the insert, which I'm going to show you here. Okay, and she'd find the middle pleat. And you actually can count them to make sure. I'm kind of doing this the quick and dirty way so that you see what I'm doing. And just pull these threads, the pleating threads, up. Should go right up the line, pulling each one of the threads up like this. And then you can clip these threads, tie off both sides so that you'd tie 1 and 2 together, 3 and 4 together, all the way on up, and do that same thing again on the other side. And then you could cut the fabric right down the middle of this, what we call a valley, okay? So that I would then be cutting the fabric right in half after I have secured the threads on both sides of it, because you don't obviously want to get those threads pulled out or you're not going to have your pleated fabric anymore. Okay, so I've taken this piece of fabric. This is actually going to be an ornament, but we'll use it for demonstration purposes here. And I've pulled up the pleats. So after we've determined the height that we need for our insert, the next thing we have to handle is the width. So here's my pattern piece. The pattern piece already had a seam allowance for both the sides built into it already, so I don't need to add that. But I do want that seam allowance available for when I go to sew the garment together. So what I've done is I've pulled the threads out of my 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side, and I've tied them off, 2 to each side, 1 and 2 together, 2 and 3 together, etc. So my piece will go like that. You can see my ornament's a little bit bigger than our insert is. But we now need to talk about how we're going to handle this side, because as you can see, it's not straight. You also can see my ornament is going to be much bigger than this little piece is. So how do we handle this situation right here with our pleats? Well, you have 2 options, and as the designer, it's really up to you to decide what you want to do. Okay, for the other side with that curve, you again have 2 choices. You can have the pleats go right up into the arm sky, like on this little dress, or you can have the pleats come out and tie off an end so they're not part of the curve at all. Again, you're the designer and you make the choice. Now, if you want to have the pleats go up into the arm sky, then you're going to pull the pleats out of that 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like I did on the other side. You're going to line it up here, and you're going to take your fabric marker and you're going to go right along that curve and mark it on your fabric. Okay, and you can see here, here's the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and here's that curved marked. Now you're going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to zigzag right along this edge, inside of it, not on it. And you're going to set your machine for a small tight zigzag, 0.5 width and 1.8 to 2 length. And zigzag along there, and then you cut right on that purple line. Now, if you don't want the pleats in the arm sky, then what you have to do is lay your pattern piece on, and you're going to have to pull those pleats out to width a 1/2 inch over from this edge. I'll take my ruler and measure over 1/2 inch because I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we'll mark that on the pattern piece. And I think, as you can see, I've pulled the pleats out all the way to that line there, and then you tie off all the way down. So you see you've got this much larger seam allowance. Now when you sew this, you'll be sewing along a 1/2 inch here, and then it'll be going the 1/2 inch up to there, but that will make sure that there are no pleats in that seam, in any of the seams. You will have a chunk here in your outfit, just like I showed you in the other dress, that doesn't have any pleats. So again, it's just what look do you like and do you want in your outfit. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out some of my other videos. In particular, you might enjoy my one on how to center a smocking design. I hope you give inserts a try, and happy smocking.